The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome from the General Assembly in the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and Cox Communications. And we're very pleased to have the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Tommy Norment. Good to see you again, sir.
Woody, it is a real dream to be with you this morning. Thank you.
Great. No longer a 45-day short session, much shorter than that. And I know there's been a lot of action, especially in your Courts of Justice Committee as of yesterday.
We had an exciting time there yesterday. We were trying to wrap up the last of the bills. Today is crossover, so we had to accelerate getting a number of the senators' remaining bills out. There were some controversial ones there, but we did our work.
Why is crossover so important?
Well, under what we call the procedural resolution, we set out certain timelines to try to make these cats be appropriately herded. And crossover is when the House of Delegates must complete all of the work on all of their legislation so that it is sent over to the Senate, and the Senate must complete the work on all of their bills so that it can be sent over to the House of Delegates. So it's sort of like halftime.
Well, there are a number of matters that you've been working on, specifically regarding texting while driving, for example, and I know that's been a while around for a couple of years now. Tell us what happened yesterday and why that's important for the Commonwealth and your constituents.
For several years, a number of senators and delegates have been working on this texting issue, which is a lot more complex and perplexing than you might think at first blush. I'm certain that even you driving down the interstate have had people go by you that are not talking on their cell phone but are obviously texting away, and it is what we refer to categorically as distracted driving. And it's interesting that they have run a number of surveys and found that the incidence of having traffic accidents is 14 times greater when someone is texting than when they're talking on the cell phone.
14 times? 14
times more likely to have an accident. Earlier this morning, I just happened to coincidentally be looking at a handbook that AAA handed out. And they had some facts and figures in there. And one of the questions was, what is the number one thing that you would like to see improved in Virginia's traffic laws? And texting was the number one by far. So there's an awareness of the general public out there that there is an issue. The problem is that up until this year, we have not been able to make as much progress as I think we should from a safety standpoint. I noticed yesterday that on the Courts of Justice Committee, which I have the privilege of chairing, that most of my Republican colleagues voted against the texting bill that we had there. And there are a lot of concerns. The current bill that passed out of the committee yesterday would make it a primary offense. What that means is that a police officer could stop you if he observed you and thought that you were texting. Right now, it is not a primary offense, so a police officer has to actually stop you for another offense before he or she could charge you with texting. In other words, he have to stop you for speeding, and at the same time he stopped you for speeding, also observed that you were texting. So this bill makes it a primary offense. It also says that if you are involved in a reckless driving charge and that at the time you were driving recklessly, you were also texting, then it has a minimum mandatory fine of $250 in there. So some of my more conservative friends think that this is intrusive, it's a violation of privacy. They think that it's too difficult for a police officer to figure out whether you're texting or whether you're talking. I don't know. Most of the people I know don't have the phone up to their ear when they're texting. I mean, they're not texting. They kind of like to see the letters that they're punching just so, you know, they don't happen to send that text to some place it ought not go.
I understand it's a particular problem with younger drivers, and it's also been compared unfavorably to situations where people are actually inebriated with alcohol.
Well, I do think that comparison is totally unfair. But this distracted driving is an interesting situation. Probably 10 years ago, I had the Department of Division of Motor Vehicles actually do a study on distracted driving. And it was in part because of the early advent of texting and the use of cell phones. And originally the focus was on cell phones because texting was what didn't exist then. That's more of a recent, you know, phenomenon on it. But it's not comparable to driving under the influence. But you see people, I commented maybe to you last year that I was driving from home up to Richmond for one of the day's session, and a young lady passed me, and I know she was a college student because she had the stickers on her car. But she drove by me and actually veered over in my lane, and I had to drive off onto the shoulder of the road. But when she went by me, she had a hot dog in one hand and was texting with the other hand and trying to drive at the same time. And I don't know whether it was the mustard on the hot dog or the texting that caused her to veer over in my lane, but it really is extraordinarily dangerous. You get on the interstate and where there's sections, the speed limit is 70 miles an hour. So that means most people are running about 79 miles an hour. And somebody is texting, and you look down for a split second. Well, the number of feet that you're covering per second at 79 miles an hour is extraordinary, and you look down just very briefly and look back up, and you may find yourself in the back of a semi.
Another topic that has garnered some interest this session is the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, commonly known as drones. Now, we're kind of used to seeing them on the news now because of our efforts abroad, but apparently some law enforcement agencies are starting to use them around the nation, and there has been some concern about issues relating not only to the use by law enforcement but private use of drones. What has happened in your committee on that subject?
Well, I'm looking up here at the ceiling, and I think there's one flying around right now, so I need to be careful what I say. First of all, I say that in jest, but when we hear the word drones, I think most people are relating to perhaps what's gone on in Afghanistan, where they're using these unmanned drones. These drones actually can be the size of a bumblebee. They're that small.
Literally that small.
Literally that small. Law enforcement has been using them to some modest extent in Virginia, but the issue really does come where private citizens access them through electronic outlets and are using them. Very controversial subject. Yesterday in front of the Courts of Justice Committee, you had one of the more interesting alliances and bedfellows that I have seen since I've been in the General Assembly. One of the spokespersons was the representative from the ACLU.
The American Civil Liberties Union.
Yes, that very conservative organization.
Yes.
And as she was reciting who some of the supporters of this moratorium on the use of drones, she mentioned the ACLU, and the next one out of her mouth was the Tea Party.
The Tea Party. Wow.
Now, if you don't think those aren't some strange bedfellows there on it, representing usually opposite views. But this whole situation on drones, there are some serious privacy issues with it. Basically, the law that came out, the bill that came out of the Courts of Justice Committee would have put a 2-year moratorium on the use of drones. It does try to carve out some exceptions, like on an amber alert.
Sure.
Also, what we call a blue alert, which is a situation where law enforcement find themselves in an emergency situations. But we did hear some compelling testimony from law enforcement yesterday. One sheriff came in and talked about a crisis situation that they had when they called in the Virginia State Police in a helicopter, and the bad guy actually started shooting at the helicopter and hit it on a couple of occasions. Had they been able to use a drone, it would have been a much safer situation, that you would have not placed the state troopers in peril, much less obtrusive. But there are a lot of privacy concerns out there, and it's almost Orwellian in that people are concerned about what the next intrusion is going to be. Difficult balance, but law enforcement is very concerned about it.
And of course, these are all kinds of transportation-related matters, and I understand a bombshell was dropped yesterday in the State Senate, an alternative substitute to the governor's proposal on transportation.
Well, it was a little exciting, I will say that, because yesterday was a very long day. I really have not had the opportunity to see what my friends over in the House of Delegates did on transportation. The reason I mention that is that the governor's transportation proposal was presented in both the House of Delegates and the Senate. I do know that my friends in the House recessed for 2.5 hours yesterday to talk about it. I'm not exactly sure what all that cogitation resulted in, but I'll look forward to checking it out this morning. On the Senate side, one of our senators who had been working on transportation dropped in a substitute that would be substantially different from the governor's plan. And of course, any senator is entitled to offer an amendment to any bill at any time, so it's not an issue of process. The process is appropriate. But this transportation issue is probably the most compelling issue in this year's General Assembly. There have been a number of senators who have been working collaboratively up until yesterday to try to find an approach that would be acceptable to 21 of the 40 senators. Senator Watkins had been very involved very early on and had shopped a plan for months. Senator Wagner out of Virginia Beach has been very involved in it, as he chairs the Senate Finance Subcommittee on Transportation. And then Senator Newman, who is the chairman of the Transportation Committee, had also been working on it. And each of them had different proposals in addition to the governor's proposal. So there were at least 4 alternative approaches that were there. I have not completely read the bill that was the substitute to the bill that was filed yesterday, but it's my understanding is that it removes the gas tax at the pump and in essence puts a sales tax at the wholesale level. It also took out 2 fees. In the governor's bill, there was a $15 increase in the registration fee, which is one of the lowest in the country. And there was also a $100 fee for hybrid cars, the rationale being that the hybrid cars, while using the roads, are not paying a proportionate share of the gas tax. Some of my more fiscally conservative friends who listen to voices out there in the dark that say you can't increase fees or taxes are sensitive to that. So I think those have been stripped out of it as well. And also I believe that this substitute anticipates this internet tax,
right,
which is working its way through Congress. One of the preliminary concerns that I heard last night is this internet tax is still a very iffy situation. It's been pending around in Congress for maybe as long as 13 years. If that internet tax does not pass, then under this substitute, the amount of revenue that would be generated for transportation would be de minimis. And when I say de minimis, our viewers might say, well, what the heck does that mean, Tommy? That's some fancy word they taught me in law school. What it means is this, that for my citizens in Gloucester who use Interstate 64, we all know that there is a choke point from Newport News near Patrick Henry Mall until you get to past the 295 turnoff when you're heading to Richmond. And the reason is that it comes down from 4 lanes to 3 lanes to 2 lanes. To put a third lane from Newport News to where 295 cuts off of 64 is a $3 to $4 billion project. Just for that one project, $3 to $4 billion. Well, the ratio that we use when we're trying to figure what things cost is 1 to 10. Mm-hmm. So, de minimis in this case, without that internet tax, it only kick out about $250 million a year. That $250 million will not even pay for the debt service on that one project from Patrick Henry Mall to 295. Will not even cover that one.
I get your meaning.
So that's what de minimis is in this case. I mean, we need in Virginia to raise right a little bit less than $1 billion every year in perpetuity to meet the transportation plans.
Because right now we aren't engaging in new construction except for funds that were borrowed back in 2011 and some of these private-public partnerships, because the law requires maintenance to occur first.
That's correct. Under Virginia's system, even though we collect money in what they refer to as the Transportation Trust Fund, which is a little bit of a misnomer, maintenance must be paid first. And at least for the last 10 years, every governor, every secretary of transportation has been saying somewhere around 2013, 2015, it is going to take every dollar in the Transportation Trust Fund just to do maintenance. And I don't know how it is around Richmond, but down my neck of the woods and on Route 17, which my friends in Gloucester have to drive every day. Yeah, it's 1 or 2 potholes that I've noticed, just 1 or 2 of them. And I mean, that's great if you're in the front end alignment business or the tire business. It's not so good if you're a driver commuting to work every day.
And of course, there are a lot of critical needs in the district you represent, because there's a lot of tourism. You have a number of military installations, and you have a lot of businesses that are located there. And of course, we want to continue to attract business, and you can't do that without a good transportation infrastructure.
Well, you really can't, Woody, and nobody likes to pay taxes. Nobody likes to pay fees. I abhor it. But what you cannot do as a private citizen is have an expectation that government is going to deliver all of these services and nobody's got to pay. And so it becomes a question of what is reasonable. You know, what is a reasonable contribution as a citizen we should make for those services? Virginia, for a number of years, has been recognized as the best place to do business in America. And that is an extraordinary accolade. This year, we slipped, depending upon the source, from number 1 down to 3 or 4 in the country. That's still fabulous. But we slipped for one reason. We are 33rd or 34th in the country with an effective transportation infrastructure. We have slipped that far. We are now being talked in terms of Los Angeles, California, with our congestion issues. And you cannot have a deteriorating transportation network and expect goods and services and people to continue to move effectively. And my citizens, over in Gloucester, many of them come from Gloucester or Middlesex or Matthews across the Coleman Bridge there at Yorktown to go to work in Newport News and Hampton and Williamsburg. They prefer to live in Gloucester, which I can understand, but to work, they have to go down Route 17, and then some of them have to go down Interstate 64. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, I used to own a business right there in York County, just near the Coleman Bridge, and the traffic absolutely unbelievable from like 4 to 6 o'clock.
Now, besides herding the cats you spoke of earlier, chairing the Courts of Justice full committee, you also chair a very important subcommittee on Senate Finance dealing with education, and there's quite a bit going on there as well.
There's a lot going on in education, and I am passionate on public education, and I am a very ardent advocate on higher education in Virginia. I've had the privilege of chairing that subcommittee for the last couple of years, and it has been a challenge. But this year, we're trying to do some new innovative things. The teachers in Virginia have not had raises for 3 years, and because my daughter is a kindergarten teacher, I get an earful on that.
I'm sure.
On it, Dad would prefer not to subsidize the 2%. So, but in the budget is a proposal for a 2% increase for both instructional personnel and classified personnel. So the Senate went a little bit further than the governor's proposal to pick up the classified people who would be the custodians, the individuals working in the cafeteria. I mean, they got to live too.
Sure.
Also, on behalf of the governor, I was carrying his Teacher Fairness Act, which is a major reform issue for teachers. And it's interesting, it's called the Teachers Fairness Act, but the legislation covers administrators as well.
I see.
And what it does is it makes a provision for either a 3 to 5 year provisional contract, and that the 3 to 5 years is at the exclusive discretion of the school board. But it also has a probationary period for administrators. It has set up a much fairer system for teachers who are recommended for dismissal, set up a much fairer hearing process with an independent hearing officer who has experience in education law and education.
So that person would not be associated with the school district. This is someone who is independent from the school district who would be making those kinds of decisions.
That's absolutely correct, Woody. And one of the reasons the governor asked me to do this, for approximately 10 years, I represented a teachers organization, had over 1,500 teachers in it. And I have participated in representing teachers many of these grievance hearings where dismissal has been recommendation. And generally, the individuals who were hearing it were employees of the administration of the school system, which I'm not suggesting was inappropriate, but if you're the teacher being recommended for dismissal, there's at least a certain inference, but maybe the playing field is not equal.
Just the appearance of it itself.
So that's that reform measure is undertaken. We put some additional revenues in the Senate budget for K through 12 public education. We are trying to figure out what we can do with some of these challenged school districts. We put some additional money in there for an effectiveness review. We're very concerned about Petersburg. We have lost an entire generation of young people in Petersburg.
A whole generation.
It's absolutely it's terrifying. I mean, to think that we have done this. And we're trying to figure out what we can do with a school system like that. We've put some turnaround partners in there already, but it doesn't seem to be having the impact that we hope. So we want to do some efficiency reviews. We want to follow up on these efficiency reviews to see what we can do. And I just use Petersburg by way of example. Sure. Unfortunately, there's some other school systems that are out there as well. But in order to do this, it does take money. It takes resources. We've put money in there to try to attract some of the best students in our public colleges and universities to go into the teaching profession.
Is that the Teach for America program?
That's exactly where the Teach for America program. So we're trying to do some innovative things that will maintain the level of excellence that we do have in many of our school systems, and we're trying to bring that level of excellence up in those struggling school districts. I mean, you know as well as I do, if you just look at public education from a business model, if we can get a young person graduated from high school, who can read and write, is reasonably articulate, knows how to balance a checking account, do all of these type of things, then we are avoiding a cost down the road for that student who does not do that, who is either going to end up on public assistance in one form or another, or even worse, is going to end up in our correctional system because of criminal behavior. So if you just look at it from a business model,
Sure.
it is a absolute wonderful investment where you get your return on the investment.
Now, what about the governor's call for an increase in charter schools? I believe there are only 4 in the Commonwealth now. There's a resolution that would give jurisdiction to the State Board of Education, as I understand it, where charter schools would make applications to, versus the system now where they may make application at the local level.
You're a good student, Woody. You've been doing your homework.
Because I listen to you.
Oh, yeah, if you listen to me, then you're not going to learn very much. No, you're absolutely right. For a number of years, we have been advocating chartered schools in Virginia. But if a group wants to submit an application for a charter school, it currently must be submitted to the local school board. Obviously, there's a certain inherent tension there. You get an application for a chartered school, and the local school system is thinking, well, gosh, one, we're going to be in competition for these students, and secondly, the fact that a group wants to come in and create a chartered school, at least by inference, is suggesting that we are not performing our responsibilities in providing a quality public education as well as we should have. Because there are only 4 chartered schools in Virginia, as contrasted with Florida, which has 540 some, we decided to change the law. And the initiative that is underway is that the local school boards would not make that determination, that our public school systems, our overarching, would make that decision rather than on a local basis. And we're hoping that that's going to stimulate more interest in starting chartered schools. Of course, the State Board of Education, who will be looking at this, will have to establish some criteria so that those submitting the chartered applications would know what the review process is going to be.
Got about a minute left, but I want you to address a couple of more issues if you can. The first one, tourism versus local school districts setting their own calendar, and the Tim Tebow bill.
Very quickly, I am a fierce protector of the Labor Day situation. To give you an incidence, if school opened before Labor Day in the historic Triangle, Busch Gardens alone would have to lay off 1,000 workers.
Wow.
One entity. So that is why I'm protective of it. It's not only a parochial issue, it's a state issue. Tourism promotes about $19 billion a year in income to the state. On the Tebow bill, whether or not those who are homeschooled should have the opportunity to participate in public scholastic sports, I am not a supporter of the Tebow bill. I admire Tim Tebow, and I think he's a great face for the NFL and was a fabulous college player, and he was homeschooled. But there's a lot of resistance from public education in that regard.
Thank you for being here, Senator Tommy Norment, the Senate Majority Leader. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I am Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.